The boy king was only a child. He wore the crown, but the regents held the power. They ruled in his name and used the throne for their own gain. A child king usually appears when death comes fast and the line of power breaks. A father dies in war. A brother dies from fever. A ruler leaves no grown heir, or leaves one, but the court rejects him. Then the crown goes to a boy, sometimes only a few years old, because blood matters more than age. That is when the danger starts. A child can wear the crown, but he cannot command an army, settle a tax dispute, or stop a palace plot. He needs adults to speak for him. And that is where the fight begins. Queens may claim they are protecting their son. Uncles may say they are defending the realm. Top ministers, nobles, and generals all push for the regency, because the regent controls the real machine of power. He signs orders. He names officers. He takes in the tribute. He decides who gets close to the boy and who stays out. In many courts, the child king is kept behind locked doors, while the adults around him fight over the seal, the treasury, and the army. The seal matters because it turns force into law. A decree with the king's name looks legal, even if the boy never saw it. The court can read out his title in public, and that alone can calm riots, raise taxes, and order troops to march. So the child becomes a tool. His face gives the regime a clean story. His name gives adult rule a legal cover. But the hands that move the state are not his hands. That split is the whole problem. Formal kingship sits on the throne. Real power sits beside it, in the regency chamber, the council hall, or the barracks. The child is the symbol. The faction is the engine. And when a kingdom hands its future to a minor, it also hands its stability to whoever can control the boy first. That is where regency turns into real rule. The first move is always the same. Control the paper. Control the money. Control the men with swords. A regent does not need a crown if he can sign the orders, hold the keys to the treasury, and name the officials who carry them out. In many courts, the boy king sat behind a curtain or on a raised seat, while the regent sat with the seal, the accounts, and the right to speak first. Once that happens, every tax payment, every land grant, and every military post starts flowing through one hand. Then comes the army. The regent puts loyal men in charge of the palace guard, the city gates, and the field commanders. He makes sure the child king is surrounded by guards who answer to him, not to the royal house. Advisors who question him get pushed out, sent away, or kept waiting outside the chamber. Relatives can be blocked from court, cut off from access, or watched so closely they stop trying to speak. The child king may still wear the royal robe, but he cannot reach the people who could help him rule. At court, the takeover is dressed up as duty. There are public prayers, formal processions, and speeches about protecting the throne until the king is ready. Coins, seals, and proclamations keep the royal name on the surface. But the message is managed from behind the scenes. The regent controls what the court hears, what the cities hear, and which victories get praised as royal success. He becomes the face of order, and the boy becomes a symbol used to calm the crowd. That is the trap. The child king is not ruled by age alone. He is ruled by isolation. Once the regent owns the treasury, the army, and the story, the crown is still there, but the power is already gone. The trap was simple. A child king could not fight back, and that made the regent dangerous. Across history, the worst ones used the same playbook. They cleared rivals first. They turned law into a weapon. Then they took the land, the offices, and the money for themselves. In 15th century France, the Duke of Burgundy, Philip the Good, ruled for Charles VII's son for a time and filled key posts with his own men. In more brutal cases, regents did not even bother hiding it. They blamed nobles for treason, seized their estates, and handed the jobs to loyal cousins and allies. One purge after another sent a clear message: stay quiet or lose everything. In Joseon, Korea, Queen Jonghui acted as regent for the young King Danjong in the 1450s, and real power shifted fast after the coup leaders moved in. Court rivals were stripped out, then executed or sent away. The child king's name was used to make the violence look legal. That was the pattern. The crown stayed on the boy. The knives stayed in adult hands. In late medieval and early modern Europe, some regents went further and used faith as cover. They backed church courts, called enemies heretics, and used that label to justify arrest, exile, or death. Once religion entered the order, cruelty looked clean on paper. It sounded lawful, it sounded holy, but it was still a purge. Some regents used war the same way. They launched campaigns in the child king's name, then used the victory emergency to crush dissent at home. Taxes rose, grain was seized, men were pressed into service. If a town resisted, it was accused of disloyalty to the boy on the throne. The war was not just outside the walls, it was inside the kingdom too. And then there were the ones who got rich. They confiscated estates from fallen nobles, absorbed offices into the regency court, and paid themselves from the crown's own chest. Every new charge meant more land. Every new arrest meant another title to sell. By the end, the regent had the kingdom, and the child king had only a name. That is what makes these rulers so vile. They did not just hold power, they fed on the weakness of a child and called it order. Inside the palace, the boy king lived like a guest who was not allowed to leave. His rooms were deep in the inner court, behind locked doors and guarded halls. He woke to tutors, prayers, and lessons that did not feel like school. They felt like training. He was taught which words to say, which faces to trust, and when to bow his head. Every visit was staged, every ceremony was watched. Even his meals could be tasted first by others, because everyone feared poison and everyone feared the regent. The danger was not just in the walls, it was in the people around him. A servant could be taken in the night, a noble could vanish after one bad rumor. The child saw arrests, heard boots in the corridor, and learned that silence was safer than questions. In some courts, he was even made to watch public punishments from a distance, just long enough to understand who held power. That kind of childhood leaves a mark. It teaches a king that fear comes before law. So when he grew up, if he lived that long, he did not step into power as a free man. He stepped into it already broken in one place or another. Some surviving kings tried to revenge their fathers. Some stripped the old regent's friends from office. Others turned hard and cold, then ruled with the same mistrust that once trapped them. The regent's cruelty did not end when the boy wore the crown. It followed him into every decision. That is the real damage of a child king's prison. The body survives, but the mind learns to rule from fear. Then the boy finally grew up. In court after court, doctors, bishops, and nobles were called in to say the same thing. The king was no longer a child. He could ride, judge, sign orders, and speak for himself. That moment sounds simple. It was not. For the men who had ruled in his name, it was the start of a fight for their own lives. Many of them had no plan to step aside. They had built private armies, filled offices with loyal men, and treated the regency like a permanent throne. So the transfer of power often came with arrests before dawn, sealed warrants, and guards at the gate. The young king would enter the chamber with a new seal, a new council, and a long memory. Some regents tried to block the handoff. They hid accounts. They burned papers. They claimed the king was still too weak, too sick, too young to govern alone. But once the court declared him fit, that excuse died fast. In 1470s England, the fall of the Earl of Warwick showed how hard these men fought. In other realms, former guardians were dragged into trial, stripped of titles, and sent into exile with only a small escort and no real power left behind them. And when the king had been trapped long enough, he often struck back hard. Some former regents were sent to the block. Others were locked away for years. A few were pushed into quiet retirement, cut off from court, money, and influence. In France, England, Scotland, and beyond, the pattern was the same. The child had once been controlled by a man who said he was protecting the crown. Now the grown king used that same crown to punish him. By the time the purge was done, the regent's office was often a ruin. Power borrowed from a child usually ends the same way. It is taken back and then paid for in blood. That is why child king regencies keep turning into abuse. A minor can wear the crown, but he cannot command the court. He cannot pay troops. He cannot settle a fight between nobles. So the real power moves to the adults around him, and that gap pulls in the worst kind of people. The office of regent becomes a prize, not a duty. In weak states, that danger gets worse fast. The throne still has inherited legitimacy, so everyone has to act loyal to the child. But loyalty is often fake. One faction says it is protecting the boy king. Another says it speaks for the realm. A third buys officers, judges, and guards. Each group uses the child's name as cover while they fight for land, tax money, and control of the army. The king is present, but only as a symbol. And that is the trap. When succession is unstable, the whole system waits for a gap, a sudden death, a young heir, a disputed birth, a poisoned line of heirs. In that vacuum, court politics turns predatory. The regent needs allies, so he hands out offices. The nobles want survival, so they switch sides. The military wants pay, so it backs whoever feeds it. Soon, the child's rule is not about governing at all. It is about who can hold the gate, the treasury, and the sword. You see the same pattern across empires, kingdoms, and dynasties. Rome had boy emperors and power brokers behind them. Medieval Europe had tutors, uncles, and queens ruling in the name of heirs. In China, steppe empires, and many royal courts, a young ruler often meant factional war at the center of the state. The details changed, the logic did not. When the crown passes to a child, the throne does not get safer. It gets easier to steal, and the people closest to the boy are often the first to learn that a regency is just a legal way to hide a takeover. The same pattern shows up again and again. A child king takes the throne, and a regent steps in as a guard. At first, that sounds temporary, but the worst ones never act temporary. They use the child's age as cover, then turn that cover into power. They cut the young king off from the court, keep key nobles in the dark, and make every order pass through their own hands. That way, no one can tell where guardianship ends and rule begins. Then comes the legal fraud. They do not always grab the crown at once. They use seals, councils, marriages, and court papers. They claim they are protecting the realm. They claim they are preserving order, but behind those words, they are stripping away every check on their power. If someone pushes back, they isolate them. If that fails, they threaten them. If that still fails, they remove them. The method changes, but the goal stays the same. And once they have the room to move, violence follows. A rival is exiled. A loyal officer vanishes. A witness is locked up. Fear does the rest. Soon, the regent is no longer serving the child king. The child king is serving the regent. That is the real trick. The boy on the throne becomes a shield for long-term tyranny, while the people around him are crushed by short-term rule. That is why these stories feel so cold. The regent never needs to admit they want power forever. They only need to keep saying the boy is not ready yet. In the end, the child king is not the beneficiary. He is the excuse. And that is the oldest lie in regentship. That lie kept thrones warm for them and cold for everyone else. Subscribe for the next one.